To the commentary to Mitropa Cup 2025. This is a traditional competition of the Central European countries. 10 countries are coming together, to compete in chess, to play each team against each team. It's played on men's and women, boards, and also the men and women team from each country is meeting the opposition of from the same land. There was only one drawing of lots, so if Austria is playing Switzerland, for instance, among men, the same happens in the same round, for women as well. Everything is, from this point of view, symmetrical for the men and women teams, with one exception. In this year, to the surprise of the organizers, there is no team from Croatia, the men team. The ladies are here, but the men team was not able, the federation was not able to put together the proper men team, so they abstained, and for this reason we have two Slovak teams in the men competition, even though the second team is distinctly weaker than the first team, and well, they are currently at the bottom spot, but that's a competition. The level of play is quite high, even though the teams are by far not the strongest teams from each and every country, and of course there is no guarantee that the top seed, like Italy, among men in this competition, it doesn't necessarily mean if they are seeded first that they will finish first. We will try to look at the games. They started at 3 o'clock, but for the beaming, for following the games, there is a delay of 15 minutes. This is a measure applied usually for competitions to avoid any chance of cheating. So even if you have the somehow the chance to give the signal to any player, if you watch it at a hotel room, you use the computer, you use any measure possible to find the best continuation. You are not looking at the actual position, but you're looking at the situation that was 15 minutes ago. It's usually enough to avoid even the slightest chance of or danger of something irregular to happen, because these days, even if everybody is on the high level and nobody wants to cheat, the potential and possibilities for mishaps are really enormous. And well, you simply can't guarantee. There are so many chess players in the world, and so many interests that you can't guarantee that people will uphold the high standards. So you simply have to minimize the danger that the games will be influenced other than by the thinking of the participants. So we will start to watch the games from the men competition. The board number 1 is from the match Hungary against Switzerland. And well, Switzerland is doing very well. In general, the ladies are leading the competition, and Swiss boys are also very strong. So it will be interesting to see what happens in the last few rounds. Today we have the round number 6, 3 rounds to go, and the whole competition will finish on Thursday. We are looking at the board number 1, and Sebastian Bogner is a high-rated player who is trying to achieve something against his opponent with white pieces. I mean, the biggest problems these days is that well-prepared opponent will not give you a chance to really outsmart him in the opening. Usually, it's enough to get a rich position that is okay or that is fine, and well, you have the chance to outplay him later on in the game. I mean, I would say white chances are slightly better here because he has a better bishop on d3. The quality of the bishop is of course defined by the pawn structure. Black has 5 out of 7 pawns on the light squares, and white has a structure of d4, e3 and f2, making the bishop on d3 much more valuable than the bishop on e6. But okay, I mean, doesn't necessarily mean that the bishop on e6 can't be taken by the knight on f4. White is obviously hoping to achieve more on the king side than on the queen side. That's why he drifted with his knight from c3 to f4. And in my opinion, he has a slight advantage here and some prospects for the future. What is really symptomatic is that both players are playing reasonably quickly. We had a move 16, and they burned only 10 minutes of the allotted original time. Now black played knight c8. Obviously the knight doesn't belong to c8. The knight wants to find a better location, and I believe it belongs to d6, controlling c4 and e4. Black understands and acknowledges the danger that is brewing on the king side, so he will try to balance the position by bringing more pieces closer to the king side. Okay, if the knight is on d6, it's not technically speaking on the king side, but it's certainly much closer to the action, and since knight is a piece that is very local, the impact is very local, the knight on d6 can help the black king much more than knight on Boris 6. Okay, that's the game number 1. The game number 2 from the competition is between Pastor and Wenzinger. Both players have very similar ratings, and okay, white player will definitely try to get a little bit more out of the game. The problem is that giving up the bishop for the knight on c6 is not bad at all. Unfortunately, the 2 bishops in this position, they guarantee black, I would say, quite reasonable prospects for the future. I wouldn't presume that white is in any sense better. Okay, there is a problem with e5 at some moment, but black can certainly handle it. And for in the medium term, I would say that black should have no problems in this position due to the factor of a bishop pair that white is already missing. Okay, for me, taking on c6 and then playing d4, trying to open up the position, is a little bit illogical strategy. But of course, since we see that white only has burned only 6 minutes so far, and black is the party that is surprised. Now he played d6 to ameliorate e4, e5 in the future. Black is already 22 minutes behind from the allocated time. It's probably a concept that white knows or pretends to know what he is doing. And well, I mean, I shouldn't be too critical about this strategy, because these days you can come up with not so much something new, but you can come with surprises. Not everything is the same as meets the eye. So it's quite possible that for reasons of precedence, there was a game like this, or white analyzed the whole system with a computer. I might be mistaken in associating this position with good prospects for black. There is something like knight b3 and e5. We will see. Definitely, it is white who has to prove that the whole thing is worth it. And for the moment, I presume that black has somewhat better chances in this position. Okay, the game number 3 is more traditional. Once you see the doubled pawn on the b file, either on b6 or b3, you may suspect there was a moment when both players played queen b3, queen b6, and then it was a question who is blinking first. Okay, we have something like, this is called London system. London system is a peaceful development of the bishop from c1 in front of the pawn chain, and building the pawn chain the style b2, c3, d4, e3, f2. And well, the bishop is not locked behind the pawn chain, but it's still the bishop of the wrong color. Now black, after a3, willingly took on f3, probably with the plan of playing c4 and b5, and building up the strong pawn chain on the light squares. And the pawn a2 has to be protected. Well, it can go to a3, but the dynamics for white with the two bishop is difficult to prove. So this has happened before. The concepts like this, it will be interesting, because each side is trying to prove that they are right in their presumption, that what they are doing is more valid or more attractive than the plan of the opponent. I mean, so far I would say position is roughly even, so I wouldn't complain about the black prospects, even though he partied with a bishop pair. And well, I mean, to me, c4 is the main move in this position. Okay, the fourth game of the match is also featuring the same problem. Giving up the bishop, light square bishop on c6 is nothing new. I mean, these days, it happens every so often. What is more surprising is that immediately after bishop c6, black opened up the position with d4. So, believing that the piece play in the center outweighs the disadvantages of, missing the bishop pair. Okay, black has a slightly disturbed pawn structure. The c pawn is doubled. But again, in this type of position, I presume black is not really suffering. Black shouldn't complain about his fate, And typically, the white, if white achieves anything, it's very small advantage, in the best of cases. So, to me, this is the strategy that is a little bit antithesis of what I believe. But who am I to judge, as they say? I just have one perspective, on chess rules, and what is going on under the surface. And I wouldn't do it myself, in the same style. But then again, I can't say, the d5 square is so attractive, for the future that black has to worry a little bit about one or the other knight jumping to d5 and exerting pressure against the black position. So we will see. My estimate is black is doing fine, but I might be mistaken. Then we are moving to the match number 2. This is a match between Austria and Slovakia, number 2. Surprisingly enough, white player is not so weak. I mean, Jablonitsky Martin has a very good score in a Slovak team competition. In the league number 2, he made something like 8 out of 9. Excellent result, but it doesn't necessarily percolate to the achievements in this tournament. And unfortunately for him, he already played 5 games. This is game number 6. His score is very modest, or exceedingly modest. He only made 0 points, despite the fact that he's trying to play like an open game against anybody. I mean, he's not shy of complications or fighting against his opponents, but so far without much success. So I hope in this position he will be more lucky. But his opponent is a strong player from Austria, Blauberger Felix, who is already 2500 and belongs to the strongest players in Austria. And Blauberger is leading the Austrian team, and Austrian team is doing very well so far. They were not so long ago in the top 3 teams, even though per seedings they are nominally not so strong. So this is from Catalan system. The white has a bishop on f4 and hope to play e4, but the pressure against c4, pawn c4, forces white to find ways of how to handle it. If you take on d5, c takes d5, c takes d5, might not necessarily be to white's advantage, so you should rather try something like knight d5 or knight d2, and then the bishop on f4 is a little bit in trouble. So white is facing not an easy decision, and it will be interesting to see how he manages to solve the riddle after bishop a6. I would say black knows exactly what he is doing. He have burned only 10 minutes compared to 22 for white player. So to me, white is in some small trouble, because obviously his opponent knows more about the position than Slovak player. On the second board of the match, you see Majdecki, who lost quite a few games already in this competition, despite the fact that he has 2500 rating. He's facing Patrik Števik, who is under 2300, but he used to be 2350. It's a young gifted player from Slovakia, but since he's already 18, he should probably have a bit more laurels and more higher rating. And again, we see black is doing doing fine. I would say the strategy of putting the knights to the king side, what usually White was doing in Ruy Lopez against Black. Now this is Italian game. In the move number 3, they played bishop c4, bishop c5. I would say Black is doing perfectly fine in this position, and we will see what can White do to prove that his rating turns him into the favorite in the game, at least paper favorite. Based on the position, I have difficulties to believe that he has better prospects than his opponent. So, this will be quite interesting because the underdog might even be more successful. On the board number 3, there is again the match between Turchan and Dotzer. I mean, the Austrian player is a young man trying to improve and making strides. Well, he is quite young, already solid international master, hoping to become grandmaster in the future. And we see they play some form of dragon variation without long castling. So if Black plays g6, bishop g7, I mean, it's a system that is interesting. I mean, you have to solve the control of the center, because without the bishop on e7, it's difficult to move the e7 pawn, and d5 square becomes vulnerable, and so on. After knight d7, Black is probably planning something like knight e5, threatening knight c4. Well, to me, this position looks, equal enough, but, well, okay, White can play f4 and f5 and so on. It will be quite interesting, but so far, Black can be satisfied, even though when I look at the time consumption of both players, it's comparable. So, I mean, we have a parity also on the clock, clock that is measuring time for both players. Okay, on the fourth board of the same match, Slovakia 2 and Austria, we see Mango Lukács is facing Valin Peter, who belongs also to the generation, coming generation of the young Austrian players. And well, after queen e3, queen a5, Black is ready to transfer his queen, to some better square, either b4 or h5 and so on. I mean, h5 is not possible immediately, but I would gladly go to the other side of the board, even though now, for the moment, it's not so easy, because it might be even critical after bishop b6. I don't have queen a6 and then c5, queen is trapped. After bishop b6, there is the only sensible move is queen b4. After a3, I mean, it's hardly possible to take on b2, because the queen will be trapped, so you have to play queen b3. This is rather limiting, for the Black queen, but it might be okay. But I am suspicious about the move queen a5. I don't like bishop b6, queen b4. To me, it seems to be too dangerous for comfort for Black. But okay, it is quite possible that if Black is playing like this, he knows what he's doing. Especially if you consider that Black haven't burned any time at all. I mean, he has still 1 hour and 31 on the clock. That it means he only spent the time from increments. You get for each move 30 seconds premium. And well, White is sort of thinking and trying to understand why bishop b6 is not such a big problem for Black. And Black obviously knows what he's doing. Otherwise, Mango would not be playing with such a speed. It means, he wouldn't be playing without burning any time at all. So, this is a very interesting moment, because White is facing something unpleasant. I mean, it feels like wrong for the opponent. On the other hand, it's very difficult to prove. So, it's quite possible that this is fine for Black, especially given the time. I mean, Black would be really too optimistic to go into a position like this without previous knowledge and not spending any time at all. So here the disparity is on the clock, and White has already burned more than 30 minutes or 35 minutes. The next match is between Germany and Italy. This is very prestigious match because you are looking. Oh, sorry. I mean, this is. Okay, sorry. This is Duer Moroni, and well, Duer Moroni on the first board of Italy, Germany. Italy is the team that is seeded number one in the competition. So I mean, they are paper favorites in the whole competition. On the other hand, Germany that came with a very limited team of 4 players. All of them young boys that are, young men that are trying to improve. The youngest of them is only 15 years old. They still show some potential and strength, and so far Germany is among top 3, and well, it is the might that has to be reckoned with. So this match is quite important for the final standing. And well, again, we see the picture that is reproducing something that we have seen in a previous game. White has not spent any time at all. He clearly knows what he is doing, and also not only so far, but he must understand the position a bit better than the opponent, because if you have on the clock 1:28 at this stage and Black has only 50 minutes, it's a huge disparity of nearly 40 minutes on the clock. And well, there are many advantages, many imbalances in chess. One of them is if you are solving the problems more efficiently, more quickly than your opponent, you certainly can't complain, and it's a very good sign. So far I would bet White has at least some advantage, especially trading the bishop on g7 must be to White's advantage, because the fianchetto bishop is very important for the balancing of the position. And well, if Black freely traded on b2, queen b2, even h4, h5 at some stage might be very unpleasant. Black doesn't even have enough pieces for the kingside defense, at least for now. And especially his time consumption is a little bit scary. Okay, we will see how Black manages to extricate himself. Obviously he is facing some problems because he's unsure how to proceed. On the board number 2 of the same match, you see much more, I would say, balanced position, balanced in the sense, symmetrical in nature. The pawns are completely symmetrical. If you see a pawn for White, you can find a pawn for Black, all the way, to the only open file on the C file. We can talk about, location of the pieces. I wouldn't say Black has such nice pieces, but the, simplified nature of the position guarantees that he can look into the future with some optimism, and it shouldn't be in any way better for White. My feeling is this is quite an equal position, even though Black is now spending time how to proceed. The first stage of the opening, we have reached already an early middle game at a move number 16, and well, the bishop on e5 is quite unpleasant. Maybe at some stage Black can even play f6 and try to push the bishop away, but the problem is weakening of the king side. Okay, you can't have everything in chess, so it's difficult to say what is the best. No, I'm doing it on a fly. And well, but feeling-wise, this is not a real problem for Black. Black should be doing fine in this position. On the board number 3, we see, a very interesting, modern setup. You willingly accept d3 pawn and e4 pawn. It's like the big gap on d4 is not so scary, because otherwise all the white pieces are well located. I'm ready to strike with d4 for White at any moment, and White is benefiting from the semi-open c file, exerting pressure against c5, c6, c7 squares. which strictly limits the scope for black pieces. And well, okay, it's a question if white can get anywhere, but it's not like white is experiencing any troubles. The only problem is how to improve the position to his satisfaction. I mean, how it means, is it possible, for instance, to get the knight to c5, like knight b3, knight c5 would be very unpleasant for black. Okay, after knight b3, there might even be knight a4 or some such, so, difficult to say if white can improve, successfully his situation, radically on a short notice. But since all the pieces are already developed, I mean, he is sort of obliged. If he set up the pieces like this or the position like this, he's obliged to look for ways of making improvement in this position. Okay, I mean, the time consumption is comparable between white and black, so this is not such a big problem. So, I mean, okay, to me, white has a very slight advantage, but, I might be mistaken. This might be completely equal. Okay. Game number 4 is very typical, like English opening, where black played d7, d5 early, traded the d pawn for the c4 pawn. And well, now, but there was a pawn on e5 as well, and after f4, the central pawns for black have disappeared. White has d2 and e3. They seem to be rather modest, but they are, I mean, very, not obstructing the situation for white pieces. Both bishops on b2 and g2, they have some hopes of exercising pressure against the black position. So, my estimate is, and this is a little bit dangerous for black, and well, white should be able to try at least, for some advantage, even though, I mean, it's an open question. I don't like very much the transfer of the queen to h6, but then again, it's not like when we see the original idea for one or the other side, it's very easy to dismiss it and say, well, this can't be right. I mean, these days, the creativity at the chessboard is valued very highly, because with normal standard play, you would have too many draws and, too many positions or too many games that are simply even and, equal in the nature. So, I would say, I like the white prospect better. But then again, this is just the beginning, introduction into the game, and well, the time consumption is comparable. So, so far so good for both sides. Now we see the top board in the match between Slovakia 1 and Slovenia. Of course, this is like a little bit like a joke, because many people to these days are confusing Slovakia and Slovenia. I mean, that you can see it also on the international scene. I mean, if there is something like a big political event or meeting, in Slovakia or Slovenia, some of the journalists are so confused they are believing, one and the other country are the same. Slovenia is Adriatic, so it's in the south, close to Croatia, and Slovakia is a Middle European country, so there is a distinction, even though the name is practically similar or the same. The strength and the history, of course, are distinct, so it's not the same. And also, in the chess sense, Slovakia has prepared a little bit better team than Slovenia, for the reason that usually the country that is organizing Mitropa Cup is trying to show a little bit of strength, and well, there is a hidden ambition to build a team that has the chance to win the whole competition, even though there's nothing special, no special rewards are being given for this. But it's a question of national pride, more or less. On a small scale, we are talking about something that is not so important, but still. Here, big hero of the Slovak chess, Pechac made it to the level 2600, which is not a small feat. a man from the small country has made a name on the international scene. You can see it on his results. You can see it also on his time consumption. His opponent Lavrencic already has burned nearly 40 minutes out of his allocated time, 1 hour and 30 minutes. And White has managed to eat only 10 minutes, and now he is facing a tough decision. Should I play Queen d4 or Bishop d4? Not so easy, because in both cases I suspect Black will be playing e5. So whatever is a richer proposition, whatever is a idea that is giving White more options, should be better. And well, in this respect, Queen d4 seems to be slightly, to White's advantage, but White just wants to make sure that he makes the correct decision. Actually, every single move in the game of chess is of high importance. So taking it easy, playing with the left hand in any moment, also in the opening, is not really advisable, because the more exact, the more to the point you play at every moment of the chess game, it makes a lot of sense, because you can't be a very strong player without attention to detail, as they say. You have to take every position as the task. The task is to find the best move. And well, since chess positions are so variable, so flexible, this is not an easy proposition. Okay, we will see what White decides after knight d4. Now we will move to the second game of the match. Slovenia, Slovakia. Well, also on this board, Slovakia has a player with much higher rating, not necessarily with a better position. This is very interesting, because the Black position is compromised. White is ready after a short castling to rip-open the position, but if you don't move the king from e8 somewhere sensible, rook on h8 is not participating. So there is a contradiction in terms. You would like to play short castling at some stage, but if you can't, you can't. So it will be very interesting to see how Black is solving the riddle of activating the rook on h8. I would say that White is doing fine. And we can see it also on the time consumption. White has burned 20 minutes less than the opponent, so this is indicative that White is more comfortable in the position. In the game number 3, we see something very exciting. Now b4. Of course, b4 is an attempt to rock the boat very quickly on the queen side, because we have opposite castling positions, and of course in this type of positions it's very important to find out who is the first to attack. And well, if you play b4, you acknowledge the fact that Black has an ideal setup of a7, b7, c7. The pawn cover of a Black king is practically ideal, and to rip it open is not so easy, only with the help of pieces. So White is simply using the pawn. Against pawns he's using the pawn, and of course Black can take on b4, but it means he will open or semi-open the b file against his own king, and well, that's always very dangerous. So b4 might be logical, but there are moves like knight d4, and after taking queen d4, bishop f3, queen h3, and so on. Well, it's not an easy position. This will be highly charged, and well, both players are creating. They don't exactly know what is going on. They have a very comparable usage of time. And well, this is quite interesting. It started with bishop b5, f5, which is called a Lottish gambit, and well, you can go crazy even in the opening. Crazy. It's a well-known position, but not everybody likes to play so sharply. from the very beginning of the game, because it creates a situation that is a little bit different, not standard, not too typical, for the Spanish opening or Ruy Lopez opening, but interesting enough, highly charged, and if you have opposite castling, you probably won't be following the boring game. On the board number 4 of the same match, we see something that people know and understand. This is called, Banco Gambit. If you play something like b5 and it goes all the way to here, that white is eating 2 pawns, a b and a pawn for the price of the c4 pawn. It's called Banco Gambit in some form. This is a method of trying to take over the initiative, for black. You improve the prospects of your pieces. You have 2 semi-open A and B files against white A3, B2 pawns. Lots of pressure, also the help of the bishop on G7, but of course no guarantee the strategy will be successful. It's very difficult to say if this as a concept is good enough or well enough for black, but definitely it forces white to play very well, because if he plays meek moves or weak concept, it won't be good enough. So black should probably now play Queen A7, Bishop A6, and so on. Okay, it's a big question. Do we have enough for the pawn or not? Again, the time consumption for both players is comparable. So far, we are only following the introduction into the problem, and difficult to say. My feeling is white is slightly better, but okay. I'm not only influenced by the extra pawn that white is possessing, but the knights on c3 and c4 are quite unpleasant for the opponent. They are limiting his scope, but again, this is only beginning, Okay. The last match that we are following is between Czech Republic and France, and Czech Republic has a young, very promising player, already 2500, Finek, and when I say young, I mean 15, 16, very young player who is showing a lot of prospects in Czech Republic as in a tender age of, as a very young player. He played in a Czech championship among men and all that. He is steadily improving, and he is now facing real opposition in French player, and we will see. We are seeing, they play the Scotch game, d4, bishop c5, queen f6. This is all well known, and it is a middle game without queens. It's not ending. It's not a typical middle game, because queens are promising or giving dynamics to the position. This is something between middle game and ending, and they call it simple positions. Simple positions are typically with 2 rooks, 2 light pieces each, and when you start trading pieces at some moment, of course you are coming closer and closer to the end game. So everything you do in this type of positions, with one eye you should look at the prospectful endings. Here black will play probably knight e7, something with f5 and so on, and white finds it difficult to take on b6, because then black would recapture on b6 with an a pawn, improving his pawn structure massively, and that would be beneficial for him. So so far so good. I would say black is doing fine, and also indication is white is burning a little bit more time than the opponent. He's not quite sure how to handle the position, because it's everything is understandable, but still it's a little bit different than your typical opening stuff. Now he plays h4 to play h5 to show some initiative with a pawn play. And well, okay, it took him time to decide because this is exception to the rule. You are supposed to develop pieces in the opening. If he plays with a pawn, he has to convince himself first that this is the best idea that he can find. On the board number 2, we have a very interesting position from one point of view. Black has only knights, white has only bishops. I mean, only in the sense, 2 knights against 2 bishops. What is better? Of course, the bishops are thriving in open position. This is by no means, completely open position. And, black has, black has an extra pawn because, there is a problem under the surface of this, opening position. There is a problem for black that the 2 knights are very difficult to coordinate. Difficult in the sense, if you have 2 knights, I mean, the knights are either complementing each other, like a knight on say, d7 and b6. One is controlling dark squares, the other one is controlling light squares. And, if you move one of the knights, you have to change color, so the change color of the piece, that the piece is controlling a different type of squares. And well, if you do it, then you lose the perfect coordination. Here the knights are complementing the pawn structure. I mean, black has 5 out of 7 pawns on the dark squares and is attacking d5, so this is not an easy proposition. White is forced to try to open up the position and to compensate for the weakness of the d5 pawn. I can picture something like f4, for white, early on, but I mean, after b takes c3, black can take on d5 already, and he will have 2 extra pawns. Well, there is something like bishop c4, knight c3, maybe some move, that is creating a problem for white. For black, not easy. I mean, this very original, unusual position, highly charged, and well, I'm quite intrigued to find out if black has decided correctly to put his stake on 2 knights, because if the position opens up, the 2 knights, there will be no match, they will not be able to compensate for the bishops of the opponent. So, it's either good or bad, difficult to say on the fly. On the board number 3 of the same match, Czech Republic and France, we see a more conservative position from the Caro-Kann defense. And well, white has a very good control on the light squares with lots of pawns on the light squares. Dark square bishop, so this should be fine. But since the queens have disappeared, the whole thing is not so easy. Well, I mean, I'm surprised by the move knight b6, because after bishop a5, knight b6, I can play c5, and if the rook is on d8, then to me this is not very understandable. But I see now the knight was on d7 after bishop a5, b6 is followed by knight c6, and well, if the rook goes, the knight was hanging on d7, so this is conditioned by the last move. I mean, somehow black has overlooked that bishop a5 is such a big problem, so now out of the necessity, he is ready to sacrifice the exchange after c5, play knight d5, bishop d8, rook d8. At least it won't be so easy for white to prove that his advantage of the extra exchange is so valuable, because the black position is so firm, so tough to break, that it will take quite a few moves, to prove that white is, much better. But of course, c5 is the move that I'm expecting, and white must be better, because simply, if you have an extra exchange, it's like having 2 spare pawns, and well, this is too much, for comfort. I mean, if you are without the pawn is the minimum what you can lose or win in the game of chess. But if you have 2 pawns, I mean, it's perilously close to having extra piece. I mean, one piece, weakest piece, a knight, or close to it, is bishop. If you have extra, 3 pawns, it's like the same as having an extra piece. So after c5, black will suffer terribly. Okay, and last position. It's very interesting. This is something I haven't seen. This is they are fighting. A very interesting fight. Rook on a1 is hanging. So after queen a1, there might be something like bishop b2, but then queen f1, bishop b4. This is not easy. But of course, in that case, white would be playing with queen against 2 rooks, and black is somewhat underdeveloped. That's the really dangerous proposition. After knight e4, it's either taking on e4, then you have something like bishop g2, and after rook e1, some idea. This might not be so easy. Not be so easy to prove that white is doing great or black is doing great. Also, queen e4, f3 might be a problem. Queen e2, and then the queen is really like in danger of being trapped on e2. I'm not quite sure what to do now. Definitely the position is dangerous for black, and we will see if there is a way out. Even at the beginning of the round, we can see the positions are highly charged. They nominally play already for 1.5 hours, and we haven't yet looked at the games of the women's section. And as I have said, the teams, they play with the same drawing of lots. So if Hungary is meeting Switzerland in the men competition, the same goes for the women teams. Okay, after f4, bishop c1, we see something very interesting, highly charged. Black for some reason has a problem that after e5 the knight has to go. Then if the queen takes on c4, white will be enjoying simply 2 bishops, and 2 bishops in every position, or every semi-open position, or even position like this, is a great bonus. So I'm not quite happy with the black prospects, and it's very interesting to see that white is a better player on paper. And to me, this position, I love bishops, I love bishop pair, and for this reason I presume white is already enjoying advantage, or maybe substantial advantage in this position. It's not so easy to play for the black players. So in this time, Swiss lady should have advantage against the opponent. Okay, this is something. Black is already enjoying the castling position, safety for the king, and white has aggressive knight on d5, in the moment when white is actually behind in development. On the other hand, white is playing with 7 pawns against 5 pawns. Do I see it correctly? 2, 4, 6, 7 against 6 for black. So 1 extra pawn, and a position that is a little bit, dangerous, because white is behind in development. But it's not easy to prove with black, how to do it, how to handle the situation, how to punish white for playing so aggressively, so optimistically. The knight can take on e7, diminishing the danger. To me, moves like f6 or bishop e6, they come to mind. But I'm not so sure, black will have enough for the missing or sacrifice pawn. Sometimes you say, I am missing the pawn, or I have sacrificed the pawn, even though you might have lost it. So, presumably white is better here, but since the time consumption is comparable, this is creative. I have never seen a position like this, I'm not even close. And well, I understand the implications. White may pay the price for having played so optimistically. But to me, White is doing fine. But it's we shall see how good is it in practice. How good is it in reality. Now, after bishop e5, something interesting. King is on f1. I mean, is it a problem or is it not a problem? I mean, are we ready for fighting the opponent? In my understanding of chess, this should be perfectly fine for white. F2 square, which is the only vulnerable square on the semi-open F file, is protected by the queen. White has all the pieces developed with the exception of the rook on h1, but rook on h1 doesn't have a problem to participate later on after h4 and h5. I can improve the rook via h file, and white has an extra pawn and black is underdeveloped. When you look at the bishop on c8, rook on a8, I am a little bit suspicious. This smells. I don't see any other move than d6, bishop g7, takes. I mean, it should be very pleasant for white. Simply extra pawn and all the chances to convert it in the ensuing ensuing end game. Well, it's still a complicated end game, but I don't see how white can be punished for original maneuver king f1 and then bringing the rook from a1 to e1. So I mean, to me this is a much better position for white already after the move 13. So white is in favorable position. The fourth board of the same match is the typical position where you sacrifice the pawn on d5, you don't take it back, you play knight a6 and try to play around the doubled pawns d4, d5. And well, okay, this is from Panov defense, and black is believing good pieces and activity, and also better development, because black has more pieces developed, and also is better developed because black has castled, white hasn't castled, white has some weaknesses, pawn on g4, so we see bishop f4, rook c8. Both moves were played very quickly. I'm not sure if black has enough, but certainly white has to be careful and has to acknowledge the fact that this is not so easy. If black should win the pawn back, either on, well, more realistically on d4 than d5, it would be fine for black players, but now with an extra pawns in the and extra pawn, one pawn in the center, you have d4 and d5. They are taking a lot of squares, controlling c6, e6, c5, e5. Well, it should be better for white, but there is some danger lurking. I mean, it's if we are only busy with defending the pawns, it's also not the best proposition. So we will see. If it is fine, black certainly has prospects, and it's very well possible that white has no advantage whatsoever in this position. And also, okay, the time control or time management is fine for both players. They have comparable spending of time. Okay, now we see a match, Austria and Croatia, and well, something interesting. White is ready to attack on the king side. Black is also trying to do something, but after h4, queen f3, it should be necessary to go away with a knight from g4, like knight h6, and then it's a question if white cannot attack, like straight away with f5 or something. The bishop on d4 is quite strong, but on the other hand, the feeling is that concentration of white pieces on a king side, this might be quite dangerous. If you look at the time consumption, the lady from Austria is not very happy. I mean, she's burning a lot of time. And when I say a lot of time, I mean there is a huge disparity between white and black, the minutes difference. That's a huge time advantage for white, and well, it may translate into something, nasty that happens, to black. But we will see. I mean, it's too easy to or too early to predict what will happen. But I don't have a good feeling for black position. Okay, then we have game number 2 in the same match. Now the Austrian player, the Austrian lady, is doing fine. All the pieces have been mobilized. Black is not playing with the rook on a8, which is not a tragedy, but it translates into burning some time after rook d1. But okay, I mean, well, it's not so easy to fight black in the center. c4 is not possible. The bishop on d2 is not ideal. So, this should be fine for black. She can play queen d7, then, rook from a8 somewhere. I believe, we are looking at a position where black is not suffering. It should not suffer, because all in all, knight on f3 is exceedingly modest piece. Knight on f2, no prospect whatsoever. I mean, well, okay, you can go to g4 or some such, but other than that, looking at a position, I have a feeling black is doing fine, simply fine, and also the time, consumption is adequate. So, I mean, there is no advantage for one side or the other on the clock. On the board number 3 of the match, Austria, Croatia, we see something very concrete. The h pawn and g pawn for black were traded, so it was like g5, g4, I can imagine. This is a modern form of playing chess. King is still on e8. Well, there is a possibility of playing bishop a4, but since black has knight d7 in any form, it's probably not decisive, and then e4 would be hanging. After knight e5, it's not so easy. The problem, I mean, not so easy for white. Nominally speaking, white is doing fine in the sense of development, because the queen on d1 is also developed, not only queen on b6. And now, as I indicated, bishop a4, knight d7, and well, if I develop the piece like knight c3 and then somehow get bishop e3 in, white may even prove that the whole concept for black is a little bit too much. You have a semi-open h file, which is to white's advantage. Pawn on h7 is weak. I mean, the only question is to finish development question. I mean, that's the problem. I shouldn't, call it question. It should be more a task for white to manage that all her pieces are playing, as well as possible, because the whole thing for black may collapse. And well, I don't believe it's so promising. But okay, I mean, if worst comes worst, black can play bishop g7, even short castling, because the bishop on g4 is so strong. It's taming down white's initiative potential. So maybe I'm too conservative, too, I would say, depressed from this point of view. Okay, sometimes there are moves like knight d5, bishop d1, knight d7, and then taking on d1, but I'm not sure it's appropriate here, because if the worst comes worst, after knight d7, black can play bishop d1, a4, knight b6, a take b6. That's a little bit too much. I'm trying for too much, with white. And white doesn't even have better development. It's only the unbalanced nature of the position is typical. The players are trying to not only to take the initiative very early, but to find a way to rock the boat to own's advantage. And the originality of the position might be to the black's benefit or to the white's benefit. I'm a little bit old and conservative. I have a feeling, this is a little bit dangerous for black, at least to my understanding. Okay, the last game of the match is more conservative. Rook c3. Well, there is a pawn on e5 hanging. Okay, after knight d3, the rook on c1 was probably, hanging. So you have to, prod the knight, The knight will obviously take on e5. Black is a pawn up, so it should be perfectly fine for black. And well, it's a question how big is the advantage for black, because white, after moving the queen, will play rook c1 or some such, with very good pieces, with active play. I would say somewhat better for black. That's my estimate here. And well, definitely not so easy for white. Okay, white is trying to attack a5 indirectly, at a distance. So if you move the knight just like that, queen a5 might be a problem. Okay, but it seems to me it's white trying to play for equality in this position. Even rook fd8 is possible or some such. So no, I'm not sure. I'm not only not sure, but I'm not trusting white's position very much. In this case, white is playing to get even chances, and well, that's not so promising. Okay, in the match between Germany and Italy, we see something highly charged. There is a knight hanging on c3, obviously, but the last move that white play is a takes b5. Obviously, if you recapture, white will take on b5 and try to get the pass from b pawn. If black takes on c3, it will be taken, queen c3, b takes a6, and well, a pawn can be very dangerous. On the other hand, black has two pieces for the rook, so rook c3 is charged, and also then b4 is hanging, but the a pawn is devilishly strong. B takes a6, and then rook b1 and a7 and all that. It's a question. It's very interesting that, because Marina Brunello is a very strong Italian player. She is ambitious, and well, she is certainly creative. The last move was very creative with a takes b5, and well, this is something that is not pleasant for black. Always, when you are entering the uncharted territory, they call it in English, well, you don't know, is it good, is it bad, is it ugly, is it nice, can I play it, do I have enough activity, and so on. It's not easy. It's not something to be envied, because black is unsure. And what if it is losing nearly by force? Okay, that's the risk in chess. That's why we love playing chess, because it's not a game of simple chances or so. You can be creative. You can build your position or your continuation on trust. You see that both players they have spent equal amount of time. They are sort of respectful to each other, and well, a takes b5 is probably the most exciting moment so far in this game, because really the position becomes unbalanced, and black really has to burn some time and spend some time to find out if rook c3 is good enough, if it is playable, or it should be avoided, and she should rather take on b5. Very interesting moment. On the game number 2, we have something that is a little bit tragic for white. Tragic in the sense, she would love to have the big center and two bishops, bishop pair, and after queen b3, you really have a very good control of the light squares, and black is missing the absent light square bishop. On the other hand, due to the f5, f4, the center for white is on the verge of falling apart. I want to take on e3, the d4 will be weak. Of course you can defend d4 with rook d1, then I take on e3, bishop b3, knight d7. It's a question. Well, that's the only way to go. It should still be very good for white, in the sense, white has two bishops, but still, this is an element of uncertainty, and well, I would say a moment of trepidation for white. Is there anything more? Is there a danger connected, with f takes e3? I don't think so. So I believe rook d1 is the move to follow, and it should be fine for white. White should be quite happy about it because of the the great element bishop pair that black is missing. So to me, white has better prospects here. Okay, then board number 3 of the same match. This is more hedgehog style. Hedgehog means you have a6, b6, d6, e6. Well, I'm not saying anything about g6, bishop g7. The bishop can be on e7. The hedgehog style position for black is very efficient in pushing the enemy pieces out of your own territory, because you have nothing on the 5th rank that still belongs to the black half of the board. On the other hand, with so many pawns next to each other, you are controlling each and every square from a5 to f5 with pawns, and that means something, because it's like a forbidden zone for the enemy pieces. Not absolutely forbidden. We have seen in chess practice many sacrifices here and there on b5, d5, and so on. But still, if you have to sacrifice to rip it open, it's not so easy. Here, the absence of the bishop on e7 and the absence of the queen on c7 is causing problems on b6. D6 is under fire now. After queen e3, we are talking about b6 as a weakness. Not pleasant, not so easy. After rook b8, there might be e5 or some such. So, I'm a little bit suspicious if this is fine for black. Even after queen c7, probably queen c7, if it works, is the appropriate way of dealing with it, because then the bishop on c4 is virtually hanging. But still, with bishop on c8, black is not quite there. Okay, but on the other hand, Sedina, she's one of the oldest players in this competition for Italy. She is playing very slowly. She only has now 29 minutes on the clock, and black has more than 1 hour, so the disparity of 40 minutes in the black's favor. I'm not saying it is decisive, but when we talk about the move number 14, it's not something that is advisable. If you play really, really slowly, it may cost you. So, we will see what happens here. It's probably okay for black after queen c7, but I don't like the time management of the lady with the white players, light pieces. Okay, the 4th game of Germany against Italy is a little bit of mess in the sense white was greedy in the opening, trying to hold on to the c5 pawn after d takes c5, and when it was a question of defending c5, she did queen a3 and then b4, then queen b2, then a3. We are holding for our d life to the pawn. On the other hand, black has all the pieces in the center. They are fine, light pieces. White has 3. The bishop on f1 has to be developed. But, on the other hand, pawn is a pawn is a pawn. Now h5, threatening h4, because the bishop has nowhere to go. So we have to defend with the help of h-pawn. Okay, bishop h4 is really iffy. I wouldn't go that far. Not that this is not possible to play, but I believe some h3 or h4 is called for. And well, nobody guarantees black success. Even if black has good pieces and 2 central pawns controlling lots of squares, it is a little bit dangerous position. Even more when you take into account, both ladies have burned exactly enough, the same amount of time. So it means, nobody is really confident what is going on. Black understands, lady with black, Shvedova, understands that, she should have, compensation, if not enough, at least, some compensation for the missing pawn. but everything is still open. So this is a charge position with two ladies, in full control of their faculties and the position. The result is quite open. Then we are moving to the match Slovenia-Slovakia that we know already from the men's section. Here we see something unbalanced position because black has for the moment extra pawn. I mean, white is able to take the pawn on f4, but at g5 or discovery with the bishop is coming. So queen f4, g5, possibly you have to play bishop g5, queen g5. It's a very open question if this is sufficient, and if you want to play like this, but I mean, otherwise it will be a little bit difficult to justify the fact that white lady played f4, h6, bishop g5, h4, e takes f4, and now a problem to recapture the pawn. Okay, there are ideas like rook f4. After g5 we go back with the rook. She takes h4, queen h6. Well, queen h7 is necessary, queen d6 and all that, or simply some combination, something in this style. I'm not quite sure. And I can just hope, as a Slovak captain of the two Slovak teams, that white knew what she is doing with the move f4. To me this is an open question. I am not able to tell if it is working for white or not. The second board of the same match is interesting because knight on a2 is a worse piece than the knight on h5. White has a problem with too many elements on the light squares. When I'm talking about elements, we're talking about queen on a4, bishop on e2, pawn on c4, and e4, f3, g2. Many elements on the light squares. After queen f4, black is ready to infiltrate, to play queen e3 and then something. She has a dark square bishop and also the rook on b8. This is quite unpleasant. Okay, on the other hand, white has a spare pawn and the rook on d7. So not that the position is very sweet, but still the feeling is white is overdoing it, and well, this becomes quite dangerous. If black manages to get queen e3 or rook b2 in, it might very well be very good for black. So the feeling is the lady from Slovak Republic is on the top, and well, she also has a little bit better time management, so we will see what happens, but I am betting on the chances for black. On the board number 3 we see something, and this is Queen's Gambit, isolated pawn on d4 has just moved to d5. Unpleasant because after e takes d5, knight d5, it might be equal, but black is not quite ready. I mean, if you look at it, white has more pieces in play. We are counting the pieces like rook on d1 does count, and the rook on f8 and rook on a8 for black doesn't. And also the bishop on c8 is sort of obstructing, chances for black, because, if the position opens, then white has, two more pieces in play. If it doesn't, if black plays bishop c3, there might be d takes c6, the bishop has to go, rook c1, pawn on c6 will be very, very strong. So after d5, the feeling is, white is doing better. Also, time-wise, from the point of time management, she has a better prospect. Maybe the solution is, would be knight d4, but there is knight d4, bishop d4, queen e4, threatening queen h7 mate. I don't think that's playable at all. So, it's not an easy proposition. Maybe knight e5. But then d6, and you can't take it because of bishop h7, knight f3, queen f3, not pleasant at all. After d5, I would say position is unpleasant for the lady from Slovenia. So, I mean, white has better chances, clearly. Board number 4 of the same match is much more positional, much more quiet, opposite color bishops. Probably safe and fair position for black, because usually you see, black very often gets, is in bigger trouble. So this is, at the first glance, either equal or even slightly better for black, because in Sicilian, white is obliged to achieve something in a middle game, otherwise the endings tend to be very pleasant for black. But okay, this is a question of opposite color bishops. The rule in opposite color bishops position is whoever can attack the opponent has better prospects. So, here I feel fine for black, but I'm not sure if black has anything more than a safe equality. Okay, the last match is again Czech Republic against Italy, and okay, charged position after knight b6. The threat was knight d5. For some reason, white lady is not developed. The pieces are really not playing to the full tilt. On the other hand, black had to sacrifice the b pawn in the style of Bangkok Gambit, and well, if bishop f5 or something is not bringing anything, then it might be a little bit overblown. The ladies they carry the same rating. Only white lady is not so sure about her prospects, because she's playing more slowly. She currently has a minus of 20 minutes, but a position that is calling for a little bit of caution, because you can be optimistic about the whole thing, but at the same time, black pieces are very active, and well, it's quite possible that black is doing fine. Difficult to judge for me objectively, but this is the first impression. Okay, rook e8. What is this? Something is wrong here. White is only playing with queen. Black is playing with at least more pieces. The king is ripped open. On the other hand, white has a premium, or enjoys a premium of 2 extra pawns. How do you treat this position? How do you evaluate the position? The inherent danger involved here after rook e8 is quite great. I don't like this type of, I would say, adventures, for the stronger player, or stronger, the player that has more material. But since the knight on g8 and rook on h8 are not participating, there is an idea of queen f4 after knight h6 or some such. Only the question is where to put the king. Any which way you go might be dangerous. And so, it's interesting, but 2 pawns are 2 pawns. Some people are so materialistic, they will go into a great ad, and well, they will try to grab the pawn. Recently white took on the pawn on e6, and there was king f8, and the queen had to go. So it's very interesting. Queen e6, queen g4, rook e8. On the fly, to judge the position objectively is difficult, but I am a bit worried about white player. White chances, but probably it might not be objective. If white can extricate herself, then it will be just fine, and well, she can look into the future with some optimism, like king d2, knight a3. Maybe there is nothing that black can really concretely do to damage white player. But this is a critical moment, so the white lady's elbow bar, she has to think deeply, because if she gets it wrong, it may fall on her head. Okay, the board number 3, beautiful. We are seeing the position where black didn't manage to castle. White can even play something like knight f6, then queen g4, e6 will be hanging, and castling will be costing the pawn and all that. Definitely, this is not a simple proposition, for black. But okay, I mean, materially it's equal. The feeling is, white is enjoying better prospects. And clearly this is the way. Maybe even queen g4. I don't have to take on f6. I am not able to say what is the best way to proceed, but I don't like the black position and the fact white is better developed. Also, the mobility of white pieces is much better. I mean, the rook is on h1, and at any moment she can go to e1, and black doesn't have the same privilege. So no, I'm not quite sure. I mean, sure in the sense I don't like it for black all that much. It must be better for white, definitely. Okay, too risky for black, for comfort. And the last board of the match, Czech Republic, France, is interesting. Big center for black, and not enough development. On the other hand, the two bishops for white are diminished, and they are very limited, so it's not so easy. And well, it all depends. I mean, can we get out? Can we, castle and so on time, or will it be too dangerous? I see the danger g4, g5, things like that. So it's not so sweet, or it's not only sweet for black. And okay, the big deal is that white is not happy with her position. She is playing very slowly. I mean, she has only 17 minutes plus increment time. Of course, for each move you get 30 seconds. At the move number 14, this is rather extreme. We are warning each and every player not to do it in this style. And well, if you do, then probably you are pushing the envelope, as they say in English. You are taking too much risk. On the other hand, also the position for black is dangerous enough, but she has plenty of time. Ines Bernard, for France, she can sink deeply into the thought and find a way, how to avoid most dangers and all that. Definitely, black is at the driving wheel, and she has better prospects. So even d4, d3 is possible, and so on. I mean, this is an extreme position that might be pretty bad for white. I mean, the time management, for white is so bad that she is indicating, I mean, she sees problems that she's unable to solve. I want to thank you so far. I will make a small break, and we will come back, to the annotations in few minutes. Thank you very much. Hi, welcome back. We will look at the positions of the men competition in Mitropa Cup again. Now they are more advanced. The players are sitting at a board for more over 2 hours, and well, that's enough time for the profile of the positions to develop and all that. So we will come back to the first match that we have been discussing. This is Switzerland against Hungary, and the favorite in this game. We played knight f4, trying to get the bishop on e6. This he has managed, but it's a question, because knight on d6 with knight on f6 are really taming down activity of white pieces, and it's not easy to get a real advantage. I can imagine something like f3, e4, which is connected with some risk, but white has to do it cleverly, because otherwise black position is very safe, despite the fact that white possesses a fantastic bishop on d3, and of course his position should be slightly more favorable. It's not like black player as an underdog is trying to win the game. He is very happy to keep approximate balance, but I can't guarantee this is balance. I see f3 e4 as a big plan, so the chances for white should be somewhat better. The only worry is that white is burning more time. He's now has only 30 minutes plus increment time, and black has advantage on the clock of 25 minutes, so that's not to be sneered at. Okay, the game number 2 from the same match, Hungary, Switzerland. Both players have traded the bishop on g7 for bishop on b2, and black still possesses a bishop that in semi-open position should be slightly better than the knight. But all in all, after c4, the feeling is position is close to equality, and well, actually black might be more ambitious here in principle, but he finds it difficult to find anything real, and from the point of time management is falling behind 20 minutes. So my estimate is approximately equal, and well, if black wants something, he probably has to do something like rook e8, e5, then f5. Not an easy proposition, definitely a risky plan, but I don't see very active plan for white. Okay, that might be my limitation, but I'm still in favor of the black position somewhat. On the board number 3, we see something. This was after queen b3, queen b6. I said black will play c4. This actually happened in the game, and you see quite a symmetrical position with only one open file. There's a e file. Black is able to oppose on the e file. He wants to play rook d8, e8, and then trade all the rooks, which would balance the position to such a degree that it would be unlikely that anybody can make a big progress. And well, so objectively speaking, this is quite close to balanced position, and both players are maybe unhappy, maybe happy, but they have very similar rating, and if they make a draw, nobody would blame them for not trying, but position simply patted out into symmetrical equal position. Now the game number 4 of the same match is very interesting, because black is going a little bit crazy, but not crazy enough, because rook on d4 unsettles you when you see it, but rook on d4 is there for the purpose, because now the e4 pawn is hanging, black is attacking it 4 times and it's only 3 times protected, And knight on d5 simply doesn't work because black will take with the rook. Then after knight d5, you can't recapture because after queen e1, rook e1, there is a mate on the back rank. So it would be very nice to exploit the extreme location of the rook on d4, but since the rook on d4 was played for the purpose, now white has his hands full of refuting very daring and interesting idea of the opponent. I mean, it can be done with e5, but not fully, because even after e5 there is no threat of e takes f6 and rook on e1 is still hanging. So I'm not quite sure, if it is even possible, but e5, knight d5, in my understanding is something. Definitely, this is a position, probably the most exciting position in this match, because, it's really a question, is it me or you? Something will happen, something that will be unpleasant for one of the players. I strongly suspect, it's working for black. I like the two bishops and also the pressure along the e file, the fact that rook on e1 is hanging. But, I'm not saying that, rook on d4 could as well be punished, and, it might be possible for white simply to either refute or, put a question mark on the rook on d4. This is very exciting. Okay, in the match of Slovakia 2 against Austria, we see a very interesting position. White is exerting pressure on the d file. White has sacrificed the piece on the king's side to open up the position. Of course, there is nothing concrete that is really threatening. Okay, white has only one pawn for the sacrificed piece, but his pieces are now promising, and it's not so easy to play for black. Black is actually unhappy. Blauberger, of course, is a high favorite, especially against the player. As I mentioned, Jablonitsky has lost 5 games in the first 5 rounds. Not because he wasn't trying, not because he's such a weak player. It simply happened, and well, he is certainly eager to play more successfully now, in the next rounds. And well, he's doing everything in his capacity to find something how to rock the boat against black. Black is not happy. He feels he should be better. There should be a way to repel the attack of the opponent, but the position is not so pleasant. There is a threat of knight b5, and white can certainly still improve his position. Black can play rook h8, threatening bishop f4, but then queen g4. It's not that simple. Just simply finding a move that is the least compromising for black is a challenge. Even though, materially speaking, black enjoys huge material advantage and well should be able to prove that he is a high favorite in this. So I'm betting on black, but it's very interesting how white is trying to rock the boat, and also the time management for black is indicating he's not quite happy about the position himself. Okay, then there is a position that is, well, reasonably conservative after bishop d4, king d4. I mean, black gave up the bishop for the knight on d4 and then played d5. And after e d5, knight d5, we see the position that is quite stable. White is playing a little bit conservatively. He has a bishop pair, but an isolated pawn on d4. His pieces are not playing so well, so I don't presume that white has any advantage whatsoever now. Black will play rook d8, and then d4 is weak, knight b4, some such. So not easy. I mean, the black should be happy in this position. I mean, he shouldn't have any serious problems. So no, I mean, quite a success for Stevig, who is a underdog in the match, underdog for 200 elo points. On the board number 3 of the same match, we see something that is very symptomatic, very interesting. Position is, balanced. Position is peaceful. We can talk about nearly about endgame. This is not an endgame. Technical description of the position is simple position. Alekhine was very good in this. He played positions with 2 rooks and 2 light pieces, more or less. It can be 3 light pieces. It can be 1 rook, and 2 light pieces. It can be 2 rooks and 2 light pieces, and so on. These positions, they have still some character of the middle game, but they are so close to the end game that they are somewhere in between. Neither here nor there. And well, since we know about the end games in the Sicilian, I can presume that Black is enjoying, or he is feeling. No problem. Okay, there is rook f1 and f5 and all that. Not everything is completely hunky-dory for Black, but Black should not worry. There's also e5 and taking on b7 and all that. Not that White can't play at all, but definitely, in these type of positions, Black is more than happy and, shouldn't complain because, he has a Sicilian ending and more ambitious, rook c7 to play rook c8. Okay, from the point of time, he is able to invest a little bit more because, the position is simplified. It has the nature of more like a end game. And well, there is not so much tactics and all that, so he is confident he can handle it even with a deficit of about 15 minutes compared to his opponent. On the board number 4 of the same match, we see something, small relative success for Black because position is stabilized, knight is on a2, it doesn't make a great impression. Okay, there is a problem with bishop b4 and d6 will be weak and all that, so Black has to worry or be on alert. But there are even possibilities like knight h5 now and then knight f4 and so on. Well, the white pieces are not so great as to install any fear in the opponent. My feeling is, Black is doing fine. Okay, even though he played very quickly, Black played very quickly in the opening, and then started sinking into the burning time and finding solutions. And now his time, his time on the clock is even worse than the time of White, which is remarkable because he was practically playing blitz in the opening stage. He knew exactly what he's doing, but of course in the middle game is something else. You need more time to understand the intricacies, and you still may not get it right, but definitely you need more time than for the opening that in and out. The next one is from the match Germany and Italy. This used to be very promising for White from the point of time management. Now Black is still behind in the time management, but at least his game is a normal one. Queen is on d5, very strong piece. White knights are not necessarily much better than the knights of the opponent, and White has to decide where to put his king. You can't play with a king on e1 for one simple reason, not because of the safety, of course that plays a role as well, but simply because you want the connection between the rooks. You have to connect the rooks. The best way to do it is to castle, or at least to prevent everything that the queen might do. There was a danger of queen coming to g2, which is unpleasant, and White decided to play rook g1 with the idea of g4. Okay, Black is unable to play h5 easily because you take on g6, and if I play g4, f takes g4, knight g4, there are dangers lurking on the king side for Black. And with king on e1 is in itself not such a big burden for White, because for the king the highest priority is safety. If you are safe enough, if you are fine, you can keep the king on e1 or e8 indefinitely, and still pretend everything is fine. I mean, there is no obligation to make the castling. The castling is a purposeful move, that's a way to speed up development and bringing at the same time the king into safety. If the king feels safe on e1, if bringing the king to the queen side, for instance, after castling, would be more dangerous because of b5, c4 and all that, you simply leave it on e1 and you pretend like you wanted to to have it like this from the very beginning. So of course you can't do it forever, but certainly here in this position I don't see the downside of keeping the king on e1, at least for a while. I can always castle because the king never moved in the game. Now black played knight d7 in order to exchange the knight to avoid the problems after g4, knight g4, knight h6. Now knight finds it difficult to be there, but I can take on d7, play g4. This is still should be better for white, and also white has 25 more minutes on the clock, so I mean white is at the driving wheel here, definitely. Okay, on the second board we have the reversed colors, and we see black is trying to keep balance in the position where white is potentially exercising a lot of pressure on the c file. But how to improve it? If you play knight c7, there is rook c8. White doesn't have time for bishop b5 or some such. Maybe he can do something like knight a6 and then knight c5 or something. But it would be beautiful to improve white position, because the only open file, c file, is potentially under white's control. So black is not quite happy about the position, but he believes it will be difficult for white to improve. We will see. I mean, okay, white still has more time. His disadvantage in rating is moderate, so I would say this is a better position for white, with open question if it is possible to improve white's position in any way, I mean any sensible way, without sacrificing material. Okay, we will see. The board number 3 is now more defined, and I can say this is quite a successful white, because this bishop on a2, it's a proverbial Spanish bishop. I call it a Spanish bishop because in Ruy Lopez, in Spanish defense, the bishop goes to b5, a4, b3 to the diagonal a2, g8. f7 is proverbially weak for black. This is like the locus minoris, a really weak spot in each and every game, in each and every position. And since we have opposite color bishops on the board, and the bishop on a2 is way more active than bishop on f6, there is a suspicion that this should be better for white. I mean, black should certainly be on alert and not believe this is easy and there is no problem and nothing can happen and all that. Well, it's difficult to make progress for white, but I like the bishop on a2 better than bishop on f6, definitely. Okay, we will see if white manages to improve his position and his chances to something tangible. Okay, now we have seen the opening of this one. It was this unusual English opening. Okay, unusual because it's not so popular these days. White still has this beautiful knights on f4 and all, but here there is something strange. I am missing the piece for black. Now where is the piece? Now black has only 3 light pieces, white has 4, and well, 2 bishops. Am I missing something, as they say? No, I am missing the piece. The piece somehow disappeared. This is very strange. Okay, b4, knight e5, b takes c5. How is this possible? I don't know, but to my understanding, white has an extra piece, so he's completely winning in this position. Okay, we will see. I don't know. I don't believe the sacrifice of the whole piece was justified. I see 4 light pieces and only 3 light pieces for black, so I am here not so sure if it is correct transmission or not, but this is what I see on the board. Okay, the next match is Slovakia against Slovenia, and the high favorite Pekáč is probably somewhat struggling. Okay, he may play something like Queen h3 and attack e6 and all that. And if the worst comes worst, black has Rook a6, so even winning the e6 pawn is not so easy. And otherwise, I mean, what is white's claim to fame? It used to be somewhat better, but now after move number 22, Queen b6, I would be quite happy for black. Black has chances to try to open up, or at least partly open up, the queen side where white king resides, and I don't see what white has achieved on the other side of the board with his pieces. So I mean, feeling wise, this is either slightly better for black, or in the best of cases equal for white, but not great, definitely not something to write home about, as they say, for white. Okay, this is a position where that we saw, with the rook on h8. The rook is still on h8. In the meantime, white managed to open up the position, win the pawn, exchange one knight for the opponent bishop, so the disparity is not so huge. It was 2 knights against 2 bishops, and with extra pawn under his belt, white must be better. How much better? It's difficult to judge. It's a question. The rook on h8 can somehow get into play. Maybe I'm sort of overestimating the chances for white, because he also has to be careful, but with extra pawn it definitely should be better for white, so not so pleasant. Also, the time management is balanced, so white is definitely not suffering here. On the contrary, he is calling the shots, as they say. Board number 3. Okay, we have seen the b4. Now we see black is trying hard to get counterplay against f2. White has 7 pawns against 6 pawns of the opponent. Okay, g3 is possible, but then rook g4 or some such. We have knight c6. We can win the exchange on d8, but white would probably like to play knight c6 in combination with queen a4 and killing the opponent king. That's a very realistic prospect here. But when you play knight c6, there is king c8, queen a4, queen g4. So I don't know. It's very interesting. I mean, definitely better for white. There is no question about it. Okay, the time management is comparable, but white is a better player, and also his achievements on the queen side are much higher than the achievements for black. So there should be a way to make progress for white here. At least I hope. Of course, I'm slightly biased as a captain of 2 Slovak teams, but okay, never mind. Don't take me at my word. Here we see the continuation of the story that started with Benko Gambit. Black has pieces that are really active. Okay, he's still a pawn down, but I mean, it's not the number of pawns that is deciding the game. It's the quality of the piece play. I mean, this is what I always say to everybody. And black is playing to the maximum with his pieces. Definitely he has enough for the pawn. Well, if more, this is a big question. I mean, it's quite possible that making progress will be a challenge for black, but it's it's certainly fine at the first glance. White played king h1 to be able to play f4 and some such, but okay, I mean, feeling is probably equal position for both sides. We can enter the last match, no, I mean the match that we haven't covered. This is France against Czech Republic, and you know, a great fight of two young promising players. White is trying to get somewhere, but there is a e3 pawn hanging potentially. Okay, after knight e3 there is bishop e6, but knight e1, so you know, I mean, knight e3 is now a serious threat. And well, from the point of, you know, the first feeling, black is doing fine. You shouldn't have a problem here. There is also knight g3 threat. Potential of black pieces is quite reasonable, so you know, I would say we shall see. I mean, to my understanding, white should take on g6, play rook h8, play e4. You know, maybe e4 is not possible because of knight e3. I mean, somehow swap the pieces and try to petter out into equal endgame, if that's possible. Maybe it's not even possible. I like black position in this moment after king e7, and you know, the same might be probably true also for white. White will have to think hard how to, you know, eliminate all the dangers in the position. So black is definitely not suffering. Here we see the consequence of the fight of bishops against the knight. Now black managed to do it great, you know, to utilize the knights somewhat better, because he's now threatening after knight h5, knight f4. Well, rook a4 was played to eliminate, after knight f4, to eliminate the knight by sacrificing exchange, which is a little bit desperate measure. On the other hand, you know, if white manages to take on f4 and then on d6, black king is so weak that, you know, white might have enough counterplay against the vulnerable king, like open king on the g8. Okay, so you know, I mean, black should not be worse, but he might not be so much better as meets the eye at the first glance. So rook a4 might be a solution. We will see. You know, I mean, for me, it's a little bit difficult to judge, but I can see that, you know, rook a4 is a very clever way of trying to keep balance. So the game number 3, or you know, board number 3, I mean, white never played after bishop a5, knight b6. He never played c5. That's, you know, interesting for me, really interesting. Maybe I overestimated something, but after, you know, I mean, I don't quite understand what was going on, because now queen c2, white is still better. White is still at the driving wheel. Knight on b6 doesn't, you know, feel proper, or you know, fine, but you know, I mean, it's the c5 danger is still there, but white resisted, so you know, to taking the exchange on d8, probably because it would be exceedingly difficult to break open the black position and try to win. So he's trying to positionally, you know, dominate, and we will see if this will be more successful. You know, a little bit surprising, you know, turn of events for me, but you know, it might very well be a good strategy. Who am I to judge, as they say? The very last game in the section is the game that we saw after queen d4, when black had a choice to take on a1 or e4. After queen e4, I said f3, queen e2, rook f2, bishop f1, a5, b5. The queen on e1 is in danger. Well, now after a5, she at least can go to b4, so it's not like, you know, I mean, it's completely terrible or, you know, hopeless, but it's not pleasant. After b5, the bishop has to retreat. The knight on b8 is not playing implicitly. The rook on a8 is not playing. So, you know, I mean, it's not like black is enjoying the position very much. Definitely, he is not very happy about the proceedings. Okay, rook on a1 is hanging, so I don't have bishop a3 or bishop d2. But I have knight g2 or some such. You only have queen b4. not pleasant at all. I mean, black is suffering to a degree when he's, burning much time. He has only 18 minutes plus increment time, of course. And well, after 17 move, it's not too much. I mean, that's a sign of a big problem, for the second player. So he is definitely not very happy, looking at the position. Okay, now we will turn to the ladies section, and I believe we will see something very interesting. Okay, this is a consequence of the position that we saw before. Black still doesn't have control of the light squares, but a queen on e6, a little bit squeezed. I don't know how to attack her efficiently, because whenever you play knight c7, she can go back on the light squares. But okay, she can also play, white can play g5 and try to escape, to g4 or a3. But it's a little bit, unpleasant, because there might be something like knight a6 and knight c7, and the queen is practically trapped. You have to disappear, but I don't know if you can disappear after knight a6, g5, rook f5. Then knight c7 is a big problem. It's very interesting. I don't know if it's not overblown from the point of, it's quite possible that white is not noticing the threat knight b4, knight a6, knight c7. I don't see the escape. I don't see the easy escape. I don't see the escape that would make a lot of sense. Probably knight g5, then after knight c7, bishop d5 or some such, but that's so extreme, I'm not even going to suggest it seriously. And I see knight a6, g5, rook f5. Possibly then bishop g4, knight c7, bishop f5, knight e6, bishop e6, but that's not very good, because the queen shouldn't be trapped on e6. Okay, very interesting. I don't understand. I'm sort of concerned about the white queen on e6. Definitely, I'm not happy about it. On the second board of the same match, we see black is still fighting, pawn down, but on the other hand, pieces are good. We are playing actively. There is a counterplay with c5, and well, as far as I can count, white has 7 pawns against 6 pawns for black, but opposite color bishops, the pawns are a little bit unstable, like the e5, f4. You don't see pawns drifting to e5 and f4 when you have f2 pawn, like a premium pawn. So 2 pawns were going away, and after rook d4 the bishop has to go somewhere, and f4 is hanging. Or maybe g3, rook d8, and then trading everything. Black will be happy in this position. After rook d4, I don't see any problem for black whatsoever. Interesting. I mean, well, black managed to extricate herself, completely. So I'm more happy for black than for white, and you can see white is burning time, and she has a minus of 20 minutes on the clock. Not very good sign. Not a sign of the full health. Okay, rook endings. We have seen the position with king on f1 and queen d4. Black was underdeveloped. It was clear and obvious that they will enter the position with ending with a spare pawn for white, no compensation for black, and after g4, well, it's a typical position. Rook ending. Rook endings are difficult to win. On the other hand, here black can't even invent an excuse why I'm playing with a pawn down, what do I have for it and all that. She can only hope that there is some chance for either counterplay or complications or something, but the prospects are grim here. White is simply better and should prevail in the long run. So it's a one-sided position that is played for 2 results, as they say. It's not like black can win. Black can either draw, in the best of cases, or she's facing demise in the due time. Okay, the board number 4 of the same match, exciting. Black is hurting in the sense of pawn structure. The pawns are doubled on the b file. Also, after g5, we are hiding the bishop on g7. That is, bishop on g7 is very limited. On the other hand, when I say hurt, I see 5 isolated pawns for white. Black has only 1. White has d4, d5, f3, g3, and h5. H3 and h5 are all isolated pawns. Okay, when I count them, 7 against 5, so it's not so bad. And of course, you can try to get rid of the isolated pawns by playing f4. Bishop goes and then h4 or f4 or some such. But definitely, that's a great minus. Black can play king f7, rook h8, rook h5, or at least try. Okay, I have knight g3, but then f5 and so on. So not so easy. I would say white is better, but marginally so. Okay, we'll see. But it's not only the number of pawns; it's also the pawn structure. Pawn structure is not very promising, for white. If the bishop goes, I have bishop e8, then knight c7, knight e5. There is still some life, for black in this position, even though white might be better. Bishop h2 to prevent knight c7. Okay. Now, game number 2, or board number 2. Oh, very exciting. Very exciting, this one. White is a piece up for the moment. It's a question if she can somehow, after g6, I see bishop d8, she takes h5, bishop f6, but then d5 is hanging. It should be something like knight d7, knight c6, and so on. It should be possible to save the extra piece. Okay, black has some pawns, but this looks very bad. If after bishop g5, g6 is necessary, that's a very bad sign. Also, bishop g6 might be simply, winning, but okay, there is then bishop g7 at some stage, I don't know, bishop g6 or bishop d8. Bishop d8, she takes h5 necessary, knight e7, check, kings anywhere, knight b6, to me is a solution that I would be presuming is the best one, but okay, difficult for me to judge, but I try to play simple chess. I try to understand chess on the simple level. Also, Freud with Annika has only 5 minutes left. Okay, we had a move number 24, but 16 moves to go. That's some challenge. Position is extremely, sharp and dangerous, and well, I'm not sure. I wouldn't bet that black can survive in this position. Definitely Berka Anna for Croatia has much better chances and probably sitting at a winning position. Okay, I was not quite happy with white position. She managed, Hapala managed to improve the position quite a lot, and well, it looks stable and fine. And well, the rook on a8 is still on a8 for some reason. She never made the move with the rook, probably because a7 pawn was hanging. Now after bishop c5, white is enjoying some slight advantage, possibly, or maybe not. Maybe it's just equal. Difficult to judge, but white is definitely not in trouble. So this is perfectly fine for both. Also, from the point of time, black has a little bit less time. 10 minutes down, and we are only at the move number 25. But that's a modern play. People spend really a lot of time on early middle game and openings, and then in the critical stage, between the move number 30 and the 40. Typically, the games are being decided, and well, very few people have enough reserve, enough time at their disposal. I mean, okay, if you play, with only few minutes on the clock, it's easy to make mistakes, to miss chances and all that. On the board number 3, in Croatia-Austria match, we see the consequence of the black concept. I have mentioned already in one of the previous games, king is still on e8 and also on e1. All the pieces are playing practically to their maximum, so this is quite interesting. What should we think about it? Okay, I mean, I am not sure, because I would be considering rook c3, but then bishop d7. Okay, bishop d7, because the bishop on a4 was really hanging, and after bishop d7 you can play king d7, g takes f3, rook g1, king d2, knight c4. But if white manages to survive, it will be fine. If not, not. King d7 and rook g1 is causing a real worry for me, because I don't quite like the situation, for white. Rook g1, knight c4, maybe even queen c4, rook g1 then, but that's extreme. Black is definitely better, because I mean, the concept with all the pieces active is probably more valid than the weakness of h7 pawn. h7 pawn was taken only now. We are at the move 18, and the ladies have only 20 minutes each. I mean, not easy at all. Definitely, to me, king d7 is the move, because knight on e5 is so very good. So, but even knight d7, king d7, as I said, g takes f3, I am suspicious. I don't believe white can survive this, but okay, I mean, not easy to predict what will happen, but definitely black is very happy, because now, with the double pawn on the f file, she is not even, worse from the point of the pawn structure or something. The last game in the match, the board number 4, the consequences of the position where I was suspicious. White was playing without the pawn. When we saw it, it was knight d3, knight e5. Now pawn on e5 has disappeared. Now we have the situation where, after rook b2, there is some danger of moves like knight d4 and so on. And, well, to be honest, white is screaming from pain, because she has pieces that are not so good. Being 2 pawns down, having a weak back rank and all that, this must be completely winning for black. So white is not happy, even though she still has 20 minutes to solve the problem. And in this position, or in this game, the players have reached move number 30, so it's not so bad, but I believe the position is completely lost for white, so that's not pretty. Okay, so much for the match Austria-Croatia. Now we are moving to Germany and against Italy. Something strange is going on. After queen a5, we see the position where black is enjoying the advantage of 2 extra pawns, so something went terribly wrong, for white. And 2 pawns are a little bit too much. Okay, it's not so easy to activate black rook, because you have to be careful about the back rank. Also, white is threatening rook e1, so like d4 is rook e1 and then taking on e5. There might be a solution in f6 and d4, and well, it shouldn't be such a big problem. The only problem is to activate the black rook. If black had the chance to do it, fine. If not, I mean, she has to be careful, because this is not easy. We don't want to lose one of the pawns, because then 4 against 3 on the same side would not be so sweet. So I presume this is bad for white, but black still needs some time to solve it, but since she has a little bit more time than white, it should be possible. I mean, this should be winning for black, simply, to my understanding. Then, on the second board, something very exciting. White is using her advantage of two bishops for lashing out, for creating, dangerous situation for black, but at a tragic cost of, not having good pieces. Bishop on c1, then the rooks on a1, f1 unconnected, bishop on d3 hanging. Now we see probably white has overdone the idea of attacking opponent, because if you lose the piece is a little bit much. Even after queen c2, queen d3, the f1 is hanging and all that. It doesn't bode very well for white. G takes f7, king h8. I can't imagine that white can, with a good conscience, call this promising, because if you lose, you lose. I mean, we had a move number 20. The position is extreme, but extreme in the sense white was playing a little bit one-sided chess with the hope of attacking opponent and neglecting development. I mean, black is definitely better developed than white. The difference of one piece in play, it's not only one piece in play, but also the fact that white rooks are unconnected, so the preparedness for the conflict is much higher on the black side than on the white side. We are probably looking at a position that is lost for white. That's my humble estimate at this moment. So not so good. Board number 2 between Germany and Italy. On the board number 3, we see bishop c5. Now something is wrong. I mean, bishop d6, bishop c5. It seems like white has great advantage. Rook d1 is natural, and now after knight c4, white will play rook d8, bishop f8, taking on f8. So we are not a piece down, we are actually a pawn up, and well, it's a question if this will be enough, because knight on c4 is attacking b2. You have bishop b7 going into position with opposite color bishops and all that. Not so easy, but it should definitely be better for white, and it is. I mean, knight c4, to my understanding, is necessary. Rook d8, bishop f8, rook f8, and then b3. I mean, that's the line that I'm looking at, and I don't like it for black in the least. Okay, I mean, well, that's the consequence of tactics in chess. And well, the only downside is, I mean, the experienced Sedina has only 8 minutes left at a move 22. Okay, tragic, as I have mentioned before. It's not something you should follow, you should do, but I mean, this is what happens in real life. You simply burn too much time, and then you have to make the best out of the bad situation, time-wise. We see the consequence of the idea of holding on, to the c5 pawn. Black has now 6 pawns against 6 pawns. White is still with the king on e1, bishop on f1. Knight is on h4. I don't like it that much, but I mean, it's a question if black can play something very concrete and punish the opponent. I don't know if it's possible. Even moves like g5 are possible, forcing the knight to g1 and then knight d4, trying for knight f3 and all that. It is not pretty, let's put it this way. I mean, pretty in the sense, I would like a position that is more conservative. Okay, I'm not sure about knight e5 now. Knight e5, queen d4. There might be a reason like knight d3 or something, or queen e6, when and then rook d8, knight d3. Knight on h4 is an ugly piece, like ugly in the sense from the point of location, and I don't have the reservations about the form of the knight, but that's not pretty. That's not good. This one, knight d4. I am not happy about white. I mean, especially the coordination of pieces not connected, the rooks are not connected and all that. It stings. It stings seriously. Okay, this is something that we have been looking at. Probably white has overdone it. With this f4, and well, we can look briefly at the situation. There was this point when after f4, white didn't play queen f4 or some such. Rook f4 was the best. After rook f4 g5, it might be too dangerous for white, but she played queen e2, giving everything up. Queen d4, knight g5, but why did we play f4 in the first place? After knight c2, rook on a1 is hanging. Now rook a4, rook a1 simply doesn't work. Desperate attempt. I mean, she could have had it under much better circumstances. Queen e8, queen h4, queen g6, -5. We are rook down, nothing to show for it. So this is just an attempt to do something. And well, after bishop e7, she simply resigned. A little bit a tragic, development for white, because after not playing rook f4, queen e2, knight d4, she's definitely worse, and in few moves the game was over. Okay, I mean, so Slovakia against Slovenia lost. Slovakia lost on the first board. Black did lose, but did win, the position here. Definitely this is promising. This is something that we like very much, in the sense that black managed to compensate for the mishap on the first board with the attack on the we have seen the position after queen e3. This one position, this was something that we have followed. Now rook d2 is not even preventing queen e3. Now bishop d6, g3, knight g3. A demolition on the lights, on the dark squares. The white is simply playing like there is no tomorrow. There is queen e2, king f1, king e3 is definitely better. It must be better for black, but after bishop g3, there is simply bishop f4. Rook f6, you can't go back, you can only go to e5, and after queen g5, the ladies have played all the way to the mate. Okay, it's a rare occasion where you can see the mate with a king in the middle of the board, but okay, that's enterprising chess, but not a very good one. White definitely didn't have a good feeling for defending on the dark squares in the position after queen f4. I did smell the red, but I didn't know it will be so convincing for the Slovak lady. Okay, on the board number 3 of the same match, we have something that is very interesting. I was praising white after d5, and truly true to the fact, pawn on the d file is very strong, d6, limiting black, but black is enjoying the advantage of 2 bishops, and well, it's not quite obvious how white can make a huge progress. The consumption of time is similar for white and black. Improving white position might be a challenge, like bishop on g5 is limiting rook c1, rook d2, and so on, but can play something like a5, b4, and all that. It might still be interesting, because if you don't score with the help of the d6 pawn, it might not be good enough. So I'm not quite happy with the white position, because black definitely has chances for counterplay. Then we see the position that we saw with the rook on c5, opposite color bishops and all that. Black is trying hard to achieve something like take on d4, take on d5. d5 is hanging also on the idea of bishop d4, and disturbing the bone structure is dangerous. But of course, white should not overdo it with optimism, because then the bishop will be missing after queen h4, rook a3 or something. So the position is also somewhat dangerous. It's more important than the d5 pawn is hanging for white. White definitely has some answers to find, and some problems, and she is down on the clock, very much so. Only 22 moves played, and well, white is playing with six minutes on the clock, plus the increment for the rest of 18 moves if she manages to make them. For each move, the players are getting 30 seconds. So, critical situation. White is definitely not happy. So, we will see what happens here. Now, the last match of the set is the match between Czech Republic and France, and we see something. Unbalanced position, but it's not a very good sign that white has a pawn on b7. That stings a little bit. That's a great limitation, even though the rest of the pieces are quite strong. And after knight e5, we are threatening knight f3 and taking on f3, queen e3, some counterplay. Not pleasant. Okay, I don't know how to improve white position quickly. That might be not a very good sign, but well, something like knight e5, and then queen e5 is possible, and then rook h3, queen g3, and so on. Not an easy situation for white. Still, concentration of black pieces on the king side should offer hope for some counterplay, but I am not happy about black position, because if white manages somehow to advance the a pawn, the game will be over in no time. So also bishop on a6 can come back, helping white to defend on the king side. I would bet on the chances of white definitely here, not black. Okay, the second board of the same match, we saw rook e8 and the king was on e1. Now the situation has improved. Black is pretending to be active, but the knight is still on g8 and rook on h8. That's not a very good sign. That's not a sign of the full health when white is one step away from playing king h2 and disappearing with pieces. Okay, after knight h6, I can only go to h5. Very bad sign. Very bad sign. We don't like it, but never mind. Well, it's possible to play h5 or something. I don't know. This is very, I would say, charged position. Probably bad for white, because bad for black, because white managed to somehow improve her lot. Pieces are developed, king is in the safety, and the absence of the two pawns can become very palpable. Players have comparable amount of time. I would bet on white here, not black. Okay, now this is a position. It's very interesting. There is something that happened on the way. Queen e2. Okay, this was with knight g5 and so on. We have seen the position after knight c4, queen e7. This was what was, knight f6, queen g4, as I said, e5, knight e4, queen e7, and h4. Maybe not so terrible, but certainly not pleasant for black. Now castling, rook f4, queen e2, queen e6, and well, now knight g5, rook f7 is probably not the most exact. And if we survive, check, c3, queen d5, king c1, queen f7, and now rook h6. I hope you know what is the rule in unbalanced position or unbalanced positions with different material, different type, different amount of material, and all that. The disparity is black has knight and the pawn for the rook, I mean, if you have rooks, you try to use them as quickly, as efficiently as possible. That's exactly what white is doing with rook h6, hoping for queen e4, hoping for rook d1, h1, and all that. We will attack, we will use the advantage, that we have, which is the rook against the knight, as quickly, as efficiently as possible. That's rook h6, and it stings very much. So much so that black at the move 32 has only 1 minute left. I mean, I wouldn't bet on black in the least. Okay, in the last game, there is something that happened. I mean, there was this position. We have seen something like bishop c6. Okay, this was the position. We saw the position after queen a3, which was deemed to be blunder, because queen g3 is definitely the best. After d4, knight d4, out of spite, because otherwise d3, knight d4, black is a piece up, even though she doesn't have such a good development. Rook e1, bishop e7, and now rook d7, f6, fine, but not realistic, not realistic to do any harm for black. After king d8, black is simply piece up, and after d3 and so on, I mean, she simply won the game. I mean, this is so, I would say, one-sided that black is certainly victorious. You still see that king is on d8, but with extra piece you have all the freedom to do what you want. There is no rook d1 because of rook c1 and rook d1 and so on. I mean, it's simply impossible to continue for white. This black is in a full control. So France is leading the match, with 1 win and some potential. Okay, I want to thank you very much. For a while we will make a small break, and then I will continue all the way to the time troubles, because the time control is after 4 hours, and well, we have a delay of 15 minutes, so it will take another approximately 1 hour for the games to really reach the high point, and the time troubles will be interesting. Thank you very much. Hi, let's get back, back to business. Streaming about the matches in Mitropa Cup. First of all, men's section. We had a short break before the games will really reach the high point of time travel and all that. They still have about 20 minutes plus increment to fight, but finally, even the games that were sort of preparing, for the clash of the armies are at this stage, because it typically happens between the move number 30 and 40 inevitably, if not earlier or much earlier. The first game that we are seeing, we are following, is from the match Switzerland against Hungary. And Wagner, a high candidate, high favorite in this game, was trying to push e3, e4 in, which he managed just a move ago, and now he recaptured with not with a pawn, with a knight on e4, creating a bit of a problem, because black should probably take with the knight, and then white will probably recapture with a pawn, but okay, I'm not quite sure, but that's the presumption, getting somewhat better position, or maybe it might as well be equal. The problem for white is he has burned too much time, and still has 10 good moves to play. Okay, so position is quite open. On the second board, you see Pastor against Benzinger, and white is trying for some kingside attack, because okay, a potential is f5, and all the pieces are concentrated either in the center or close to the king side. Black is still sitting with the rook on b8, pushing against b3, which should slow down white's initiative. But definitely the position is more dangerous for black than for white, because I see the potential for white to get somewhere, to make progress, and for black it's not obvious what he should do. So, and also from the point of time, black is unsure. He has only 4 minutes left for 13 moves. That's not a very good sign. Okay, board number 3, a boring equal position. They are playing something that is called shadow boxing. They are trying to hurt each other without really touching each other, and white has only prospects on the e file where he can't do much. White can potentially play f3, g4, trying to make a weakness on the king side, but it's not very realistic. I see this game, ending in a draw, because despite the best, hope for white, I don't see a real advantage. How he can get real advantage. But okay, I mean, white can play on. Only white is able to achieve something on the king's side. So, he has every right. Everybody has the right, to try his best, to try his luck. Now, the next game, I should be able to read it in. Okay, the next game is number 4, and that's a match Switzerland-Hungary, and here we have something very exciting. You have 5 pawns against 5 pawns, two bishops for black that are on, very limited, with a very limited scope. Bishop on f8, bishop c8, which is not a good sign. On the other hand, white has knight on a4 and c5, also nothing to write home about. The position is still charged. Pawn on e4 is weak and at the same time playable. The big challenge is how to improve black pieces. Maybe he can dream about g6, knight g7, knight f5, but then always queen c3 and the long diagonal. That's not what we exactly want to do. So it will be very interesting. Black has very little time. He has only less than 2 minutes, and that's not very good in a position that is maybe close to equal. He may play something like queen f7, bishop d6 and all that. I don't see anything better, but I'm not quite satisfied with black's prospects, because he has good pieces potentially, but he can't really use them. He can't say, okay, this is the way to improve. I don't see anything better than queen f7 with chances for black, but we'll see. Okay, this is the last game from the match, first match Switzerland-Hungary, and in Slovakia against Austria, the first game ended in a draw. After knight b5, queen g4, king h7, this is what happened. Knight was heading towards b5, rook h8, knight b5, c4, and then queen g4, king h7, queen h5, king g7, queen h4. The repetition is a way to jump out of the problem. The position is so messy and so probably unpleasant for black that he said, okay, I'd rather jump out of it. I don't want problems, especially after queen g4. You can go king f8 or something, but it might be really dangerous. So in the end of the day, he said, I'm happy with a draw. And the lesser player managed to score Jablonitsky to score his first draw in the tournament. Otherwise, he has 5 losses. Not for the lack of trying, but simply, the opponents were better than him and, solved the problems better. So, the first draw for Slovakia in the match Austria-Slovakia too. Now, interesting position when after queen a5, I saw this one, queen a5, bishop g2, and then after bishop g2, bishop f5, queen c6, queen c3, knight h4, threatening, things like rook e1, bishop g4. This shouldn't be too good for white, but you can see both players have played only after bishop g4. It's only move number 26. White has 2 minutes plus increment. Black has 6.5 minutes or something, and plus increment. Okay, white has 2 bishops, and black has active position. Difficult to say what is the best, but it's certainly a small success for the Slovak player, because he's underdog in the match, and he's certainly creating problems for the opponent. And now you see queen a6 is threatening queen f1, and immediate win. And it won't be easy for white to cover this threat. Queen f1 is very unpleasant, move to face. So maybe after queen a6, black is already, much better, because white doesn't have enough time to, handle the position to his satisfaction. In the position from the match, the board number 3, black definitely has a very good position, in the end game, and he managed to win the pawn, okay, at the cost of running, low on time. But since white somewhere miscalculated, he is now, worse off from the point of time, and also from the point of position, because black as a bishop, and the advantage of the pawn. This should be technically winning for black players. So not a great success for the Slovak player, because when the both players reach this ending style position, I had a bad feeling about the prospect for white. I mean, position is nominally equal, but the endings are very good for black in Sicilian defense. So not a surprise that this has happened. Now, the last game in the match is Balin Peter against Bango, and Bango started the game with a great confidence. Also now he has all the chances, to be successful. Like move is rook d8. Obviously, I mean black has to play rook d8, otherwise it won't be pretty. And then try to convert his a4 pawn. I mean bishop is stronger than the knight in these asymmetrical positions, but black is simply just better. It's not that. It's move number 42 already, so they have increment of 30 minutes on the clock already, and well, black is definitely better. If the position is winning, I can't say, but it's not a sweet point for white. Black will be torturing him for a while. So here Slovakia has chances against Austria. The next game is highly charged. Move number 31, and still the players haven't solved all the problems. White has one extra pawn on e6. On the other hand, it's a question if he can hold on to the pawn, because black will have rook e7, rook f6. Okay, difficult to play. Okay, rook e1. Now I see that it's not that easy. Probably rook e7 with the idea of taking on e6, rook e3, knight g2, knight f4, rook f4, and then you can't defend e6 so well. You can play g5. Definitely better for white, maybe even winning, but it's a small miracle, because so far white was only trying to get somewhere in this position, and it wasn't pleasant. Knight h3 threatening knight g4, e5 might be a little bit too much. f4, attempt to do something. After f4, e6 is clever, because f take g3, I take on f7, take on g3, so rook f8, winning a big tempo. And now rook e1, rook e7, as I said. And the best move is knight f4 to my understanding, because rook g3, e3 is knight g2, and we are losing. Or maybe even knight g5, but knight g5 is also possible, and then try to utilize the other rook. Difficult to say in a few minutes. Okay, so this is the board number 1 in Italy, Germany. In number 2, we see a similar position that we saw last time. Black managed to oppose on the c file, and white was unable to make any progress. Of course, this is sweet for white, but without progress, white is unable to use the pressure on the c file against black, and so the position ended in a draw. So that's okay, understandable. Then the position where I was worried about the bishop on a2, now it pattered out after rook e7 into something that is still unpleasant for black. After rook b8 somewhat, you can hold him on f7, but he will be able to extricate himself with g6 and f take g6 somehow. Hopefully, maybe after rook b8 immediately g6, and well, then simply opposite color bishops are not good enough. But okay, I mean, this was definitely pleasant for white, and well, if he managed to get only the position with equal number of pawns, I mean, after rook b8, I believe white is still better, but if it is enough to cause real problems for black, I can't say. It's difficult. Rook b8 obviously is played. The Okay, the game number 4 in the match, Italy, Germany, is also interesting. After f4, you see the situation where black is trying to use his two bishops to the maximum effect. I mean, any which way you take on f4, black can take on d4 then, and then on f4 and d4. So, making the position practically equal, because if black has two bishops at his disposal and white is a pawn up, it's sort of leveling itself up. The two bishops are a great argument for the equality. But okay, white is still better when he takes on f4, g takes f4, g takes f4, knight, e takes f4. It should still be slightly better for white. So I don't know, but probably good enough for draw for black. That's the match, Italy against Germany. And now we have the chance to look at Slovakia and Slovenia. Computer is brutal. Computer says after bishop g4, rook a6, black is much better because white hasn't made any progress and black has all the chances. But out of respect to the great opponent, black has agreed to draw in this position, even though, objectively speaking, he must have felt, black has better chances. I mean, this wasn't a great performance for a Slovak player, but okay, fortunately, the game ended in a draw, and now we have something, remarkable. Position after king b3, black can always play h5, try to equalize the position in the sense of trading the last pawn on the king's side, and then he will play 3 against 2 on the same side. And well, even though it might be a torture, this should be manageable. Black should be able to make a draw in this position, even though the game will continue for a while. Then we can see the board number 3 of the same match, and well, it ended tragically for black. I mean, we should probably look a little bit closer here. What happened, because white managed to play here. We saw this position, g3, queen g4 was better, but never mind. Still not sufficient. Knight c6, knight a7. He never played king b7, check. And of course this is +5 according to computer. Rook e3, defending g3. Now black should have played something like queen f5, but okay, queen f5 is also not saving the day. And after rook a3, we want basically to mate black or take the rook on f8. Bishop g3, f takes g3, the rook on a3 is attacking and defending at the same time. Now king b7, b6, b6 to open up the position. Of course, this must be completely winning. b6 +7 according to computer. Rook a8 is a bad move, because after rook a8 you are simply mate. There is no follow-up. After queen h3 or something, white has rook b8, king a6, queen a4. Everything is ready for the demise. After king a8, even b7, queen b1, and then mate on b8 or b5 or something. It's simply unplayable, this position. So white, Slovakia is leading 1-0 in the match, or 1.5 or half, in the match. With the chances to save the draw on the board number 2, and on the board number 3. We see something that, in the meantime, Druska is trying to torture his opponent in the sort of nominally equal position, but not equal in chances, because, white has better, pawn structure. He doesn't really have any problems. He's domineering the dark squares, complemented with bishop on d7. White has too many pawns on the light squares, d5 and g4, so, black is surely better, but if it is amounting to anything, I can't say, but it's a success in itself that black managed to reach the time control without damage, without problems and all that. So we will see. This is probably just equal after queen e4 check, king d8, queen f3, and then f6 is hanging. I don't know. I mean, if there is any better chance, maybe king c7. You can't take on f6, and I mean, the bishop on e2 is hanging. No, I mean, black can definitely play if it is playable. If black can continue, then this is not so sweet for white despite the material balance. In the last match, it is Czech Republic against France. White player, was very creative, was trying to do the maximum to create problems, but the position is materially balanced. Bishop, nominally speaking, is better than the knight in this type of position. Simply, bishop can play on two sides. But okay, the position, objectively speaking, it's so close to equality. I believe, there is a fair chance that it will end up in a draw. But possibly black can dream about playing on. I don't believe that white has chances to create any problems for black. So close to equality. Then we have the position that we have been investigating a little bit. This one, at a moment after rook a4. We have seen this last time when we checked. After rook f6, black has managed to defend d6. This is very important, and threatened rook g6. White played f4, which is bad. Rook g6, rook f2, knight f4. I mean, I'm threatening knight h3, not only knight g2, but knight h3, so rook f4 is necessary. And now bishop f3 is not the best. Bishop h5, at least creating some problems, against the opponent, and then you have the chance to play queen d6 or some such. But okay, I mean, he played bishop f3, rook e8, threatening rook e1, and now rook g7. Because after queen d6 there is rook e2, and well, end of the story. So queen c6, queen g6. I mean, we don't want, queen c6 is clever because after rook e2 there is queen c8, queen f5. So that's why queen g6, and after queen a4, now finally rook e2, rook f2, simply taking queen g3. White played king f1, but after rook e7 the game is completely over because white has no counterplay and he has to defend against rook e1. Then queen h4, queen h1. It's not pretty. Let's put it this way. I mean, the position is terrible for white. So white managed to lose, and the knights were created a triumph for black. But it was not so clear from the very beginning because two bishops are really dangerous against the opponent. On the board number 3 in the same match, France against Czech Republic, we see something that is not easy to break. Black will not do anything at all. He will play king c6, king d6, and it's a question if white even has the chance to break the pattern. Probably with a3, b4, and then b5, not enabling king c6. But if manageable, black will play king c5, and then after rook e7 back to d6. It's really not easy to see how white can progress, like a positional draw. Sometimes you have a situation where yes, one side is better, one player is better than the other one. I mean, like in a better position at a driving wheel, as they say in English. But, I mean, it's very difficult to make an improvement. I mean, black can also play, well, he can't play king e5 because of rook b7. And we have to be careful about, rook b7, king c6, and so on. So, I mean, problems like this are not pleasant. But if he manages to stay there and, without blinking, without, giving way for the opponent, then he has all the chances to be successful. I mean, successful in his defense. Okay, I can picture the pawn on b5, then, when black has to move, he plays king c5, rook e7, king d6, rook e8, and I want to play rook c8. And well, even king d7 is possible. Rook b8, king c7. I just want to achieve the moment when I can play rook c8 and rook c6. That would be winning. It might not be possible. I'm afraid that white will not be able to make any progress in this position, but we will see. That's really touch and go. Either it's possible or it's not possible at all. Okay, now the last game of this match. Okay, this is very unlikely to succeed, but not so easy to make progress for white. c6. You can play c7, and then after bishop c7, queen c8, queen c7, but he will have rook f1. Rook f1 and a1, but it's a piece down. So maybe c7 is simply winning. This is interesting. White still has 4 minutes left, so we will see if this is sufficient. Or maybe there is queen a3, queen b2, and then, when the rook goes, I will take on a2. So, this is definitely a position that is winning for white, no question about it. The only question is how to do it in the best possible way. Okay, we have covered, c7, as I said, and probably he will simply take on c7, and then here's queen c3. Okay, I'm not completely sure that this, or maybe simply queen a3, queen b2 to me is the best. A2 is a dangerous proposition. I don't want to stumble on, like if you play rook b1, after queen c8 and then queen c3, there might be queen rook b1, and that's why queen a3, queen b2. Well, we can even wait a minute, queen a3, as I presume. King has to go to g8 or some such, and then after queen b2 there is no way of handling it properly, because bishop e5, queen e5, rook somewhere. I may not be able to master it properly. Interesting. Bishop e5, queen e5, rook goes, and well, it's difficult to stop the pawn. It's difficult to stop the pawn on this side of the board. This might still be a little bit difficult, but you might have something like knight c1, or knight c3 rather, right? Knight c3 and then taking on a2. We will see. Okay, we will turn to a ladies tournament. The position, or the time is so advanced that there must be some decisions. Okay, this is a position that is, charged but not clear at all. White has 6, black has 5 pawns, but the position is stable, and it's not so easy to make a big progress for white. Bishop b5, of course, position is better for white, and black plays rook b1. With 2 bishops, bishop pair, and extra pawn, white should have all the chances, but I can tell you definitely this is not easy. It's not easy to make a real progress. So, if they play on, it will be, still a tough fight, difficult. White is better, and here rook f6. White is unable to make progress. Black can play king f8, king g7, and white king can't cross the f file, so it's very unlikely that white will get anywhere. She can play g4, but then rook f3, a takes g to land in the position that is critical for black, because white is trying to advance the pawn. There is a counterplay against b2 and a2. I'm not sure it will be good enough, because there is also an h7 pawn on pre. This should be objectively winning for white, but we will see. Black can try to create something, rook f2, f6, f7. Okay, well, it's not easy. It's certainly something that white enjoys the chances. Also the added bonus of h7 pawn and h5 pawns. My eyes, or my understanding of chess, it should be winning for white. Then we have the next one is, okay, the mouse is somehow refusing to cooperate. I don't know why. Okay, now it did it. Rook h1. I mean, we saw the position with a double pawn on the d4 and d5, and some counterplay for black. Now, the game is not over after rook h1. Black can still resist, but the chances are not great for the simple reason that, I mean, it looks depressing. It seems to be depressing. White has two extra pawns, a beautiful bishop on e5, extra pawn on the a file. If you ever take the bishop, white will recapture with either f pawn or d pawn, presumably d pawn, and we'll have a fantastic pawn structure. Black pieces, black bishops are not good enough for real counterplay, so this should be basically winning position, for white. Not very pleasant for Swiss player. Okay, this is number 5, the match, Croatia against Austria, and we see something that is not very pleasant, because black is a piece down and no compensation for it. Okay, I mean, she has not even a single pawn for it. Somewhere on the way, the piece was lost, and of course white was a little bit, pressed down, and she still has to defend properly, but it should be perfectly fine and manageable. And okay, piece is a piece, in the game of chess, advantage of the piece is a little bit too much. So, I'm betting, this is unplayable for black, in the long run. So, Austria will be losing, one game. Then, something that we have been judging, there was the structure b7, c6, d5. Now, white has made an improvement. If this is sufficient, but it's certainly not pleasant for black, because the king on d4 is better than the king on e7. There is a potential, maybe one happy day, to play g5. I mean, not early, because f5 is attacked by the knight. Well, there is a c4 idea, and then black will have to take and hold this with bishops. But okay, I mean, to my eyes, this should be okay, but here we see something that is open. White is slightly better, but probably not enough. And board number 2 in Croatia, Austria. Now bishop d2. Bishop d2 might not be the best. Bishop e1 was better, from the point of, mating attack, but never mind. I mean, simply because, when you look there, bishop e1 is the best move for simple reasons. After king d1, there is queen d2. After king b1, there is rook c1, king c1, queen d2, queen d1 mate. But bishop d2 is good enough because, white doesn't have a spot where to go. So in the end, well, we saw something very exciting here. I have to sort of try to recreate it a little bit. We saw the position rook g1. I was excited, and I was hoping that black has good chances. Knight c4, king c2 is not the best move. Queen c4 was forced, as I suspected, but okay, not enough. Knight e3, rook c1, bishop c3. Okay, I mean, this is a position that is terrible. Checkmate is avoidable, but queen f1 is not such a big mistake. I mean, well, you are playing without the bishop, so the game is objectively completely winning. There is no chance. So certainly, white can't complain that queen f1 was spoiling anything. In the end of the day, active pieces have decided for black. So the whole concept for black was a little bit controversial, but still very successful. The same goes here, with one exception. I was praising the position after rook d1, of course. I mean, this is what happened. After rook e1, rook is still 2 pawns down, and rook b1 is definitely winning, because you have a problem. You can't use the rook from b1. But after knight e3, terrible mistake. Even good players are making big mistakes. There is queen f7, and queen f7 is simply winning, because after rook f7 there is rook d8, rook f8, and then the only problem is to decide which rook takes on f8, mating the opponent, and that's not very pleasant. Horrible mistake. Knight d3 in the completely winning position. But okay, what can you do? Mistakes are here to stay with us. And if you are not careful, if you believe you have seen everything, and you can easily solve everything, you can even end up in trouble like this. Black is definitely not happy. So queen f7 is turning the tables, and the Austrian player has won, so Austria is on a way of winning the match, here. Then the next match is Germany against Italy, and we have seen the position with d5, e5 extra, and I was only dreaming about the way how to activate the black rook. Obviously, this was possible for black somehow. So, after queen e4, queen a5, h6, rook d1, rook b8, okay, the winning idea was to trade the rooks. This happened because, we saw the position after this. Now, h6, rook d1, rook b8, you can't take on d5 because of back rank problem, check. Now, where to go? King h1. And after queen d3, you can't take on d5 or d3 because rook b1 is just winning. And, it's possible to play queen a1, but then, I don't know. After queen a1, there is something like, what is it? I'm not sure, because d5 is hanging, and b5, I can play queen f5, and then after rook d5, rook b1. No, okay, there is no chance, and she played rook e1, rook b1, and of course, this is completely over. e4. Black has 2 extra pawns, and better queen, and so on. So no point in continuing the fight. So Germany leading. Another victory, for Germany in getting 2 rooks into play. Rook e7. Why is it winning? Simply because after knight e7 there is bishop c5, and no way to defend. The knight on e7. White will have extra piece, and by accident this bishop is also preventing the advance of the pawns on the queen side. The only potential counterplay and all that. So this is easily winning. After rook d7 the position was winning anyway, but after bishop e7, rook e7, there is no chance whatsoever. So Germany leading 2-0. Serious business. On the board number 3 we see something interesting. Bishop b6. Okay, bishop is extra bishop. Not only this, with bishop b6, white is defending the pawn a5. That's white's claim to fame. Now the rook will go bishop b7, a6, a7, a8. There is no way to stop it. Simply, this is winning for the white players. So this time the Germany will have to resign, to the fact that the position is lost for black. What can we do? So another one, the last one in this match, Germany, Italy. White has excellent pieces after f6 and lots of pawns, but 2 exchanges down. Well, I'm not so confident to claim this is completely winning for black, or even better for black. The danger is there that if white advances the pawn and nothing happens, and white king is reasonably safe, and the rooks are not playing. I'm trying to teach chess, and to explain that if you have unbalanced position like this, materially speaking, unbalanced, I'm not talking about overall score. This might be, more or less equal, but the activity of pieces is decisive. If black has the rooks and black can't use the rook, I mean, there is a huge problem, because you are obliged to play with your cards, to play with the arguments that you have. And well, if you are unable to, then you are in trouble. I presume after b6 white is simply better, but okay, it will be very interesting. This is an interesting position. Here we have, the Slovenia. We saw this already. I mean, we saw the position, the final position. We have discussed this. Rook b8, and white overdid it with the initiative. On the other hand, there was another game where white was mated on e5. We saw this already as well. And then we didn't see the end of this one. White managed to, convert the d6 pawn into something tangible. Well, with the help of black, serious help of black, like you see something like this. Pawn is still on d6, queen e8, h5. Everything's fine. White is better. Rook c1, and now bishop c6 is a little bit too much. You can't. Because after this, queen c6, there is check. Well, I mean, it seems like mate on f8 or h7. Almost queen f8 on this. So queen c8 necessary, knight e7, then d takes e7, and after queen b8, you have rook d8 check. Taking, you will have the queen, or king h7, e8, and then queen g8, queen h8, queen g6 are threats of mate. Even though black is a pawn up, it's still not good enough. So a nice trick, d takes e7, black played king f7, queen c8 now, and rook d8. And since you don't have a check with a rook, that would be saving the grace, that would be saving the day. There is no excuse. Either you use the rook, or white is getting the queen. So nice win for white, and it is enabled black to play for perpetual check. We saw the endgame style position that ended where black is okay. I have to press okay. If I manage, I'm not sure if I can. Because otherwise, we will get the drop off. How can I do this? Okay. Okay, I am being kicked out of this. I don't know how to. Okay, probably we don't have a chance to finish this off. Thank you very much. I am sorry, but we are on the break. I'm unable to do it.